Cults are a wild part of humanity. Bizarre lifestyles, fierce loyalty, and they often end horribly. The Jonestown mass suicide, the Waco compound, the Manson family murders. But there's a clear pattern. Almost every cult leader is a man. Jim Jones, David Koresh, Charles Manson. Why? Why don't women lead cults? Well, a few have, but very rarely. Hey, I'm Ken LaCourte. I like digging into uncomfortable topics like this and see what we learn. To answer this question, we'll first look at the dark triad, the 3 personality traits that make up a great cult leader. Now, we do find a lot of women in cults, and we'll look at the roles that they do play there. And finally, we'll try to answer the question, are cults evolving? Will women find equality in this future world of cults? Okay, so cults generally don't form around mild-mannered people who say, oh, I'd like to lead a group if that's not too much trouble. They revolve around people with magnetic confidence and a drive to dominate. Now, sometimes that's just normal leadership ability, but push it towards the extreme and we get into the dark triad. That's narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism. And they make great cult leaders. Now, it's no coincidence that about 75% of diagnosed narcissists are men, and that men are also about 3 times likely to be psychopaths. When you combine this data with the fact that cult leaders essentially create personal kingdoms, you start to see a pattern. Narcissism is the first requirement. A cult leader has to believe without question that they're special, not just above average, but charismatic, divinely chosen, uniquely brilliant, the only person alive who can have access to the real truth. Jim Jones preached equality, but he saw himself as a god. Keith Raniere claimed he was the smartest man in the world. It goes beyond confidence into an absolute conviction that they're superior, enlightened, and untouchable. And that allows them to sell it to their followers. But narcissism alone doesn't make a cult leader. A garden variety narcissist might love admiration, but they're not necessarily dangerous. That's where psychopathy comes in. A psychopath doesn't feel guilt, doesn't experience real empathy, or doesn't flinch when others suffer. Now, this is critical for cult leadership because cults demand total submission. They isolate followers from their families, they drain them financially, and in the worst cases, they drive them to their death. A person with normal emotional responses just doesn't do that. Jim Jones orchestrated the mass suicide of more than 900 people in 1978. He didn't cry, he didn't hesitate. He watched hundreds of people, including whole families, drink cyanide-laced Kool-Aid and die at his command. A few were forced to drink, others were shot. Only someone with absolutely no empathy could have led that. The final piece, Machiavellianism. It's the ability to manipulate, deceive, and maneuver people, kind of like chess pieces. It's the strategic long game. How to make people trust you, how to create an image, how to use both charm and deception to keep control. Waco leader David Koresh didn't stumble into power. He convinced a community that he was the chosen one. He arranged marriages to consolidate power, and he set up a system where questioning him was unthinkable. These leaders know how to read people. They find weaknesses and they create obedience. But interestingly, cults don't start with horror. They usually start with love. And that's how they reel people in. They offer meaning, community, a sense of belonging. In the beginning, cult leaders don't look like monsters at all. They look like saviors. One tool in their arsenal? Love bombing. It's an overwhelming display of affection, attention, and validation, and it's designed to make new recruits feel special. You're not just joining a group, you're joining a family. You're not just meeting a leader, you're meeting someone who sees you, understands you, and values you in ways that the outside world never has. And once a follower is hooked in, that manipulation escalates. Isolation is next. The outside world, family, friends, they all become the enemy. And questioning the leader, of course, means betraying the group. So slowly, the cult becomes the only source of truth and comfort, and it's the only thing that matters to followers. Now, the final weapon is fear. Fear of punishment, fear of rejection, fear of what will happen next if you leave. Now, sometimes that's like real-world threats of violence and others. Other times, it's more of a divine punishment that God's going to get you. And by the time a follower reaches this stage, escape feels impossible. Their identity is fused into the group. Their critical thinking is gone. The outside world, it's hostile, dangerous, wrong. So women in cults has always been a thing. They're usually just not the ones in charge. They make up the majority of followers. They often play key supporting roles in the organization, and they occasionally rise to leadership, but rarely in the same way men do. If men dominate through aggressive grandiosity and raw control, women tend to lead differently, through persuasion or mysticism or emotional manipulation. So studies show about 70% of cult followers are female. Why? Now, part of that comes down to psychology. Women tend to be more communal, more socially driven, and more likely to seek out belonging and meaning through relationships. Cults offer that in spades. They have a close-knit community, a sense of purpose, and often a leader who claims to have the answers to life's hardest questions. Add in the emotional intensity, the love bombing, the groupthink, the spiritual revelations. Research says women are not only more likely to join, but they're more likely to stay in the cults as well. So let's talk about women in more or less middle management roles in cults. Not as the top leaders, but as organizers, and often the enforcers. They keep the system running. They reinforce the rules and becomes the ones who police others. In groups like Nexium, Keith Raniere didn't personally brand women with his initials. That was done by his female second in command. In Charlie Manson's family, it was mostly the women who carried out the murders. Manson himself barely lifted a finger. And in polygamous cults, older wives often played the key role in pressuring younger girls into marrying the older leaders. Women are often the ones holding everything together. So why don't more of them take the final step and lead? Some people say beyond female psychological traits, society views men as just more powerful. And studies do show that people more willingly follow male leaders, especially in high-stakes situations. But another factor is how power is used. Male cult leaders tend to be driven by dominance, control, and very often by sex. Cult leaders often turn their followers into personal harems for them under the guise of spiritual enlightenment or communal living. David Koresh of the Branch Davidians, he took multiple underage spiritual wives, called it divine approval. Again, Jim Jones, he had sex with both men and women in the cult, framing it as their path to enlightenment. These men controlled their followers' lives and bodies as well. And this is where female-led cults tend to diverge. While some female cult leaders have abused their followers, like Anne Hamilton-Byrne of The Family, she forcibly adopted children and drugged them into submission. And Amy Carlson of Love Is One, she used physical and emotional abuse. But by and large, the female leaders emphasize spiritual enlightenment or a maternal authority instead of just plain old hardcore domination. Instead of ruling like tyrants, they position themselves as divine mothers. And female-led cults tend to be less outwardly violent. I mean, male-led cults are the ones that involve mass suicides and armed standoffs and murders. Female-led cults, they have that, but it's more about emotional control. Hey, if you're digging this, don't forget to subscribe so my videos will pop up in your recommendation feed. I come up with bizarre questions every week. Okay, so let's talk about the future of cults. I mean, when I was growing up, explosive cults would be in the news every few years. They'd be getting into shootouts or drinking poisons, I mean, you name it. But now, not so much. Now, part of that may be because religious influence overall in the West has dropped, and many cults emerged from religious offshoots themselves. Or maybe it's because the broader concept of survivalism has shifted from a religious movement to a commercialized industry. I mean, it now focuses more on disaster readiness than divine prophecy, but it's a big thing. But while the old compounds and isolated groups seem to be fading away, some say they're just moving online. Now, here's where I want to be careful about the word cult, because it gets thrown around a lot, often too often. I mean, not every new spiritual group is a cult, but it's a short jump from, hey, we're all mindful and exploring cosmic truths, to cut off your family and I'm your only source of truth. And online, we're definitely seeing more female gurus who pop up in what I call a gray area between self-help and a cult. These days, all they really need is a camera and a message. One name that comes up a lot is Teal Swan. She leads large online communities, with some critics calling it a cult. There's an intense devotion, an us versus them mentality, and a structure that might isolate followers from outside influence. Amy Carlson, better known as Mother God, built a devoted following entirely online. She claimed divine status, but ruled in the same manner as most manipulative cults. Hers ended in a bizarre way, with authorities discovering her embalmed body basically in a makeshift shrine covered in glitter and surrounded with Christmas lights. And there may be fuzzy lines between a cult leader and a multi-level marketing person who promises her followers health and wealth. They may not look like Jonestown or Waco, but they share some of the same DNA. I mean, a woman can market herself as a motherly healer, a manifestation coach, or a top business mentor, and build a large following that's essentially closed off from outside critique. Instead of a literal compound in rural Texas, these compounds are private forums and chat rooms. So will female-led groups ever match the scale and intensity of male cults? I doubt it. So far that hasn't happened, but you never know. I mean, the old school cult model, one charismatic leader controlling a few hundred people in a fenced-off compound, that can still function. But cults are changing, and the people leading them are changing too. And the real question might not be whether female cult leaders will emerge more often. It's whether we'll even recognize them as cults when they do. So one of those online communities that got dangerous and dark was the fat acceptance movement. They went from encouraging politeness to actively encouraging people to eat in ways that would send them to an early grave. And that advice killed a lot of people, including some of the movement's leaders. Even more bizarre was this just wasn't a small group of activists, but they converted so many others to go along with them. From serious people in the medical establishment to health magazines. It's a disturbing story. Hey, thanks for joining me. I hope you got something out of this. And if you did, come back again. Till next time.